Welcome, everybody. We are getting started. We're going to go ahead and let people get settled, but in the process, I will let everybody know. My name is Leah Adrian. I work with stakeholder and community engagement here with the Development Services Department, Austin Development Services, excuse me. And we're going to talk about our final set of updates to the National Electrical Code today. And just to remind everybody, we have all of the previous sessions are recorded and they are available on our public meetings webpage under code changes. I will drop that information in the chat in a bit. But if you missed any of the previous sessions or if you want a refresher, those are available. So yeah, welcome you to go there. For today, we're going to have, like all the previous sessions, Marty's going to give a talk and go over some of those updates to the electrical code. And then at the end, we'll have a Q&A session. If you have questions throughout the process, you can put that in the Q&A session or section of, should be on the bottom right of your screen. It'll say Q&A. If you want to go ahead and get those out and don't want to remember those for later, go ahead and do that. But otherwise, we will have time at the end to do that. And with that, I will go ahead and get started with Marty.
All right. Thank you, Leah. Happy Friday to everybody. If you haven't joined any of the previous sessions, just a few things. I will try to capture as many changes as I can, but I may miss a few. Will not be covering any medium voltage articles or some of the subtle changes. You will not receive any continuing education credits. This presentation is only informational. And then hopefully, again, there will be time at the end for any questions or comments. So I guess we'll get started. All right, so today we're going to be looking at chapters 7, 8, 9, and the annexes. So we'll start with chapter 7. That's specific conditions and systems. And Article 700, emergency systems. So in Article 700.4D, also it's the same wording in Article 701.4D in the legally required standby systems. For commissioning and servicing, the revision replaces the phrase written record with record keeping. It also clarifies that digital records can be included. In Article 700.4F, temporary source of power for a single alternate source systems, the revision requires a permanent code-compliant connection point for temporary power when servicing a facility's single alternate energy emergency source. Article 700.6C, transfer equipment, the bypass and isolation of transformer equipment. The revision now requires permanently installed bypass and isolation equipment for transfer switches that are supplied by a single feeder for emergency loads. This would be in assembly and educational occupancies and also in high-rise buildings. Next slide. Article 710D256 also is the same Article 70810C245 of critical operation power systems, emergency system wiring, fire protection of feeder circuit wiring. So a revision to the concrete encasement of feeder conductors inside of a building. I discussed this our last session with fire pump feeders, and if some other methods I'll go over after I talk about this. But if you use the concrete encasement method, there's two ways you can do it. You can either install in 2-inch concrete encasement if a fire-resistant concrete design engineer validates that the installation achieves a 2-hour rating, or you'll have to install it in 5 inches of concrete encasement measured from the surface of the cable or raceway. But there's other methods besides concrete encasement. A few of those would be the cable or raceway is installed in spaces or areas that are fully protected by approved automatic fire protection system. That the cable or raceway is protected by a listed electrical circuit protective system with a minimum 2 hour rating. The cable or raceway is listed fire resistant cable system with 2 hour fire rating. So there's some alternates to this, just besides concrete encasement. Next slide. Article 712F, General Requirements Microgrid System. The revision requires interconnection equipment listed for emergency use to separate or isolate the emergency system from non-emergency loads during utility outages. Next slide. Article 724, luminaires with control inputs that provide emergency illumination. This revision updates the title to specify it relates to emergency luminaires with control inputs. There are two different types are recognized, one for listed for emergency and one not. Next slide. In Article 728, Class 4 powered emergency lighting systems, this new article will permit Class 4 fault managed power systems if listed for emergency use and integrated into an emergency lighting system. Next slide. Article 732, selective coordination, both B, replacement, and C, modification. Same language in 70132, B and C for illegally required standby systems. The revisions added new text that any replacement or modification of the overcurrent protection device, the selective coordination needs to be reevaluated. Next slide. Article 701, legally required standby systems. So Article 701.9, surge protection. This new article adds surge protection for legally required standby systems. Next slide. Article 702, optional standby systems. So Article 702, 4A, 2B, capacity and rating system capacity, automatic load connections for energy management systems. The revision recognizes that traditional energy management systems may shed load during standby power, while power control systems will manage load and sources based on the control settings. Next slide. In Article 702.4A3, capacity and rating system capacity, multi-mode inverter based systems in 1 and 2 family dwellings. This revision provides a third option for listed multi-mode inverter-based systems that are usually grid interactive but can switch to standby mode. If a shutdown does occur due to an overload, the reconnection has to be non-automatic. Next slide. Article 705, interconnected electric power production sources. So Article 705.11C 1 through 3, source connections to an emergency, source connections to service overcurrent protections, power source connections in building. The revision reestablishes and updates conductor length restrictions and overcurrent protection requirements for power source service conductors routed through buildings. This was originally, I believe, in 2020, and then it was removed in 23, so it's brought back. So in dwelling units, you have to have an overcurrent protection device within 10 feet of the connection. Other than dwellings, An overcurrent protective device has to be within 16.5 feet of a connection. And then if it's an engineered system with a cable limiter installed, can be within 16.5 feet, and with an overcurrent protective device within 66 feet. 66 feet. Next slide. 70520 source disconnecting means the revision now permits a single system disconnect when multiple power sources are combined before connecting to the premises wiring system. Next slide. 70525B wiring methods identification of DC power source output conductors. The revised article added a subdivision that specifies the requirement for identifying DC power source output conductors. Positive polarity conductors must be marked with a plus symbol or the word positive or abbreviation POS. Negative must be marked with a minus symbol or the word negative or abbreviation NEG. Color identification rules specify that positive polarity conductors in non-solidly grounded systems shall not use green, white, or gray installation, and negative polarity conductors shall not use green, white, gray, or red installation. Next slide. Article 70530D and E, overcurrent protection. The revision updates guidelines for backfed overcurrent protective devices in distribution energy resources and in interactive systems. It's more clarity and it's more listed out now. Next slide. Article 70532, ground fault protection of equipment. The revision expands performance testing to include power source feeders where interconnected power sources can supply ground fault current. Next slide. Article 706, energy storage systems. So Article 706.7A, commissioning and servicing. The revision removes the previous 1 and 2 family dwelling exceptions. So the commissioner will be required for these two. It'll be per manufacturer's instructions. Article 706.41, electrolyte classification. This revision added a new requirement that signage must be adjacent to each entry door to notify entrance of the identification of the chemical composition for the batteries before entering the room. Next slide. Article 720, general requirements for limited energy system wiring methods and materials. Okay, so this whole section here was definitely revised and clarified. This particular article was created to consolidate the general requirements for limited energy system installations previously found in other articles, similar to how Article 300 does for line voltage installations. Next slide. In Article 720.4, other requirements, the new article specifies when sections of Article 300 are mentioned in this article, those sections shall apply. Table 720.4A identifies the limited energy articles that apply to Article 720. Next slide. One little, there's a whole bunch of changes, but one change, 720.11, limited energy system raceways and wet locations above grade. The revision states that the interior of a raceway used outside above grade is considered a wet location. So any of the cables that you install in a raceway outside would have to be suitable for a wet location. Next slide. Article 721. This article is for all the power sources for limited energy systems. The new article consolidates power source requirements and associated specific protections for all limited energy systems. Article 722 will cover all your limited energy cables. It's the largest of the new Chapter 7 articles. It's approximately 45 pages, consolidating uh, cable requirements from 6 former articles. Uh, this is where you can find the cable types, the listing requirements for those cable types, and the marking requirements for those cable types. An example would be 722 100, marking of listed limited energy cables. All limited energy cables must be marked per this section and table 722.100. For example, the gauge size has got to be at least every 24 inches along the cable. The temperature rating where the insulation exceeds 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Manufacturer identification, including name, trademark, or other distinctive marking, and then the cable type designation, such as CL2, CL3, CM, FPL, etc. Next slide. Okay, so Article 723 is all about your raceways, cable routing assemblies, and cable trays for limited energy systems. So it consolidates all the limited energy requirements for raceways, cable routing assemblies, and cable trays that were previously found in multiple articles. Article 742, that's your over voltage protection of limited energy systems. This new article establishes requirements for protecting limited energy systems from over voltage conditions, including provisions addressing primary and secondary protection methods. Excuse me. Article 750 will contain all your grounding and bonding of limited energy systems. Uh, all the previous where grounding and bonding was found in a whole bunch of different articles is now consolidated in this article. One good example of removing some redundant language, Article 750-94 intersystem bonding now carries you to 250.94 for intersystem bonding requirements instead of listing out the requirements previously in that article. Okay, Chapter 8, communication systems outside and entering buildings. Uh, this whole article was changed up. Most of it was moved to Chapter 7. Article 800, your general requirements for communication systems. This would be outside and entering buildings. Next slide. So 800.1 kind of tells you what the article's about, the scope. The revised scope applies to communications system wirings and cables outside and entering building only. All other communication installations done inside the building have all been moved to Chapter 7 now, and you'll have to meet those requirements. The informational annexes. So the informational annex A, the informational references, the revised annex adds new standards, removes withdrawn standards, and updates the addition years. Informational Annex D, examples. The revision just updated the examples in Annex D for the new code requirements. And finally, Informational Annex L. This was where you'll find the proposed organization of the 2029 National Electric Code. So it's proposed to go up from 9 chapters up to 20 plus chapters. So this annex kind of shows you what the future 2029 NEC will look like. Okay, so as promised the last session, I said that I would also talk about the City of Austin Electric Code. The City of Austin Code, if you're not familiar with it, it's where we contain our administration requirements and any technical code requirements that we've removed from the National Electric Code and then amended. So I figured I'd go over those also while we're here. So the City of Austin administration amendments with few little changes. We removed the term specification from plan review requirements. The plan reviewers, they only look at the National Electric Code requirements. Specifications are more job specific. That language has been in there for a while, so we decided to remove it because we're not looking at it, either reviewers or inspectors. We modified two of the permit exemptions, one clarifying and adjusting the exemption requirements for temporary wiring in laboratories. This would also be for like your trade schools and things like that. Basically, like if you're in a classroom setting and you're teaching about transformers and you're having to wire a transformer to teach the students, you would need a permit to wire that transformer just for that purpose. Another, we updated low voltage installation to reflect current practices and safety standards. I believe it's 30 volts and 1,000 watts of energy. So that was a change. Next slide. The removal of homestead requirements and referencing back to the building criteria manual for the requirements. The other technical codes, they already went to the building criteria for the requirements, but the electrical, we had some additional requirements that was not necessary. So now if you're a homeowner wanting to get a electrical permit, the requirements for you to pull that permit will now be in the building criteria manual, like it was for the other technical codes, instead of in the electrical ordinance. Removal of the registered industrial plant program from the annual permit section. This should have actually been done years ago. We haven't had a registered industrial plant program in years. I've been here for 13 years and it wasn't even here when I started. So it was just trying to clean up some stuff in the electrical ordinance. We also added an addition of the fire code reference concerning the fire pump disconnect requirements. In the fire code, the City of Austin Fire Code, you're not allowed to have a disconnect between the fire pump and the fire pump controller. You're allowed to by National Electric Code, but here in the city, you cannot install one. Next slide. Okay, now for the technical amendments. When I used to do inspections, I'd always hear people say, well, that's what the City of Austin requires. But you will find when you look at this, we're only down to 4 technical amendments in the City of Austin. So if you're doing something now that you think is a City of Austin code, you probably don't have to do it. We've pretty much got everything down to the model code, which will be the National Electric Code. So you might save yourself some additional work just knowing these technical amendments. One of these being 110.12, mechanical execution of work. This has been in the ordinance for several code cycles. The reason this is in here because there is no definition uh, in the National Electric Code for mechanical execution of work or professional work, I think is what it says now. But so this kind of lines it out for you that you've got to install any electrical work in a neat and workmanlike manner. You got to be parallel or perpendicular to the building. We had in previous electrical ordinances, we had looping was not allowed, but now it just says that each cable is cut to length, prevents sagging. Any looping would fall under the particular cable article uh, in the National Electric Code as far as the radius bend. So it's already covered in the code. Next slide. Then we've got our course, our Austin City Color Code, 210.5C1. This is the color codes that you have to use for your conductors when you install in the city of Austin. They got to be consistent at all terminations, connections, and splice points. We removed some phrasing in 2023 that has to be continuous along the length. We had talked about removing this during the 2020 cycle, but our city utility, Austin Energy, they require it a color code, and most of the wiring that's installed in the city is installed this way. So changing it now would probably could create a situation. Also, it alleviates some required labeling for like panels and transformers. Other part in the according to the National Electric Code, you have to label what color you're using on each phase and stuff on a lot of electrical equipment. Well, we're telling you what to use. It'll keep a lot of that keep you from having to do a lot of that labeling. So we've we've had some form of color coding since about the 1950 electrical ordinance. So we just we didn't see no sense in removing it, but we did in 2023 help out about the continuous color all the way through the length. And then we also added that exception for NM cable in 1, 2, or multifamily dwelling units, which helped a lot of electricians. Next slide. Number 3 on the technical amendments is the 680.13.1 emergency switch for swimming pools. So you're in other than 1 and 2 family dwellings, you're required a clearly labeled emergency shutoff switch to disconnect all ungrounded conductors for swimming pool equipment, and a lot of electricians miss this, underwater lighting systems. It's got to be installed in a place that's readily accessible than sight and not less than 5 feet from the water's edge. And you're also required to have a signage. It's got to be capable of being read from 50 feet. Excuse me. Uh, it's got to have the words emergency shut off. Next slide, please. The fourth and final technical amendment to the National Electric Code is the emergency switch for spa and hot tubs. Similar to the one for swimming pools, in other than 1 and 2 family dwellings, you have to have a clearly labeled emergency shutoff switch that will disconnect all ungrounded conductors for spa and hot tub equipment, and again, underwater lighting systems. Then you also required to have a sign that's can be read from a distance of 50 feet with the words emergency shut off. So that's all of our City of Austin technical amendments. Thanks to the Austin Fire Department and the way the wording is in the 2026 National Electric Code, we were able to remove the outside uh, disconnect requirement. So we're only down now to four technical amendments. So if you're doing other stuff that you think may be a City of Austin requirement, you can look at our ordinance, and it's we're pretty much go by the National Electric Code except for those four items. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Marty. When we have time, I don't see any questions in the Q&A box, but if there's anyone out there that has anything they'd like to ask about the specific for the city of Austin or just in general, even if it was for some of the previous sessions, I'm sure we have time for that. It's quiet, I'm sure. It's okay. It's Friday. It's
Yeah.
everybody's busy. Um, okay, well, we have an engagement survey if you have time to take that, just to let us know how we did for this session. Um, and we also have just all of our website if you want to go over there. Again, the website to find the previous recordings is in the public meetings webpage. So it'll have all of the previous sessions available. And thank you so much for those that were attending. And thank you, Marty, for such an informative set of sessions. So with
Thank you,
that,
Leah, for doing the slides for me.
hanging out.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
All right. Bye bye.